The stale hum of the ventilation fans was my constant companion. The air inside our settlement was thick with machine-processed oxygen, carrying the echo of countless sealed doors rattling under the pressure of the outside world. We'd been taught from childhood never to long for the open sky. It was unthinkable to risk that kind of exposure. The smog beyond the glass domes was lethal, swirling in a grayish-green haze that rendered the air itself a predator. Even the bravest or most desperate among us seldom ventured outside the tunnels without a fully functional filtered suit. But suits were in short supply and repairs were costly. It was easier, our elders said, to stay alive by staying inside. I grew up under the glow of artificial lights. Our settlement, Graybridge, was one of half a dozen that remained in the region before the collapse. An event we only ever heard about from battered textbook cities were sprawling, connected by open roads and highways. People traveled in vehicles, breathing fresh air wherever they went. It sounded like a fantasy to me. Now, the only safe route between towns was through the sealed tunnels that snaked for miles under barren or uninhabitable terrain. Ventilation fans and heavy air filters lined these cramped underground highways, wards against the toxic storms that howled just outside. Every day, half asleep, I would pass the reinforced windows set into the tunnel walls, peering out at a landscape I could scarcely believe. It was a world of swirling dust and debris. There were skeletons of trees, petrified and gray. Sometimes the wind whipped the noxious clouds into a frenzy, revealing silhouettes of crumbled buildings from eras past, all of them forever out of reach. When I was younger, I used to imagine that if I strained my eyes, I could see wide fields or vast oceans in the distance. But I grew older, and such dreams disappeared with the last time I dared to remove my mask outside. I was apprenticed to a tunnel scout named Kiera. She was the best at navigating the labyrinthine routes that connected our settlement to Ironfield, to Haven Old March, and the humbler enclaves. Being a scout involved more than just following the signage or memorizing a map. Tunnels were always in flux. Patching teams worked constantly to repair cracked ceilings, or the occasional breach from outside. Toxic air would seep in, setting off alarms, causing chaos when we had to don suits until the patch was complete. Kiera had a knack for anticipating problems. She could sense when vibrations on the metal floor hinted at structural instability, or when a door's seal was on the verge of failing. I wanted to acquire that same instinct. My first assignment under Kiera was a routine courier run. We were to carry medical supplies from Graybridge's infirmary to Old March, an older settlement known for its meager resources and struggling population. The moment we stepped into the main tunnel, the thick smell of stale air and metal pressed against my nose. Kiera looked at me and gave an encouraging nod. She carried a small portable breather on her hip, an essential backup should the filters fail. I had one too, though I'd never used it outside of drills. I prayed I wouldn't need it. We were an hour into our journey when we reached a known trouble spot. Two sections of tunnel, one from Graybridge and one from Tudovan, converged in a large junction chamber. Over the decades, foundation shifts had twisted the structure, placing extra stress on the walls. As we approached, I noticed a faint, hand-painted sign, "Proceed with caution." Part of the chamber's ceiling had caved in months earlier, and the patch job was still a shaky weld of refurbished metal plates. A circle of glaring overhead lights revealed the battered steel beams, some dotted with rust despite constant maintenance. I'd heard squads from Toothaven tried an experimental sealant for the cracks, but no one was sure how well it would hold. "Watch your step," Kiera said, leading me around a gash in the floor. We heard a distant hissing sound from somewhere above, like the breath of a slumbering beast in the vents. The intersection was quiet, more so than usual. I realized we hadn't passed anyone traveling in the opposite direction. Often you saw traders, travelers with heavy carts, or maintenance crews. On a normal day they'd nod, wave, or keep their eyes to themselves behind protective masks, but the corridor was empty. Our boots echoed on the metal grate flooring, accompanied only by the unsteady whir of fans. We made it to the far side without incident, though my nerves were on edge. The passage leading to Old March was narrower, as if it had been cobbled together hastily. The overhead lights dimmed in places, broken bulbs never replaced, but Kira marched ahead confidently, stopping only occasionally to consult her battered digital map. Every 100 paces, she'd run a gloved hand along the tunnel wall, feeling for vibrations. I'd heard stories of entire segments collapsing, entombing travelers or opening them to the lethal air. The claustrophobic retreat of the tunnel pressed closer, fueling my dread. At times, vents leading outside allowed fleeting glimpses of that toxic world. Turbulent storms scraped the metallic walls with punishing force, and a dull roar filled the narrow corridor. I could almost taste the chemicals through the protective seal. I shuddered, stepping closer to Kiera for a sense of safety. She offered me a reassuring look, her voice muffled behind the cloth mask. "Don't worry," she said. "If it gets worse, we'll find a maintenance hatch. We'll be safe." Hours passed. My legs grew weary, and my stomach churned with hunger. We stopped at a rest station built into the side of the tunnel, a small enclave stocked with emergency rations and bunk alcoves. 3 ancient vending machines lined the wall, their plastic chipped and stained, but they still offered packets of condensed nutrient bars in exchange for tokens. Kira dropped a few tokens into one, and out came 2 bars. We retreated to a corner bench and sat, chewing in silence until a timid voice startled us. A young girl stood in the dim light. She wore a worn-out protective suit that was several sizes too large. The visor scratched so badly her face was barely visible. A battered piece of cloth, probably meant to help filter air, was wrapped around her neck. "Please, can you help me?" she asked, voice trembling. My heart tightened. It was rare to see children traveling alone. Kiera immediately stood. "Where are your parents?" They're back in Toot Haven. I was trying to get to Old March to find my uncle. He said he might have extra suits for us, but the tunnel guards turned me away." She hesitated. "I got this from a scrap dealer. I don't know if it works well enough." Looking at the sorry state of her gear, I highly doubted it was up to any acceptable standard. Kira's face hardened with concern. "All right, you can come with us. We're headed to Old March. We'll see you there safely." The girl nodded, her relief evident behind the scratched visor. She introduced herself as Miri. We offered her water from our canteens, and she sipped greedily. I felt a pang of guilt, remembering that suits were precious, and I had mine, while someone like Miri had to scavenge for the bare essentials. As we stood to continue, Miri lingered nervously behind us until Kiera gently tugged her forward. The journey picked up speed, though it passed in uneasy silence. I noticed that at times, Miri's suit hissed lightly, as if it was struggling to keep out the toxic air. My heart leapt, worried the next hiss might be the one that let in the poison. We offered to check her suit for leaks, but saw no obvious tears. I prayed it would hold until we reached Old March, where at least she might find a better option. Miri never complained, only followed adamantly, trying to stifle her ragged breathing. Near the boundary of Old March's territory, we began encountering posted signs cautioning of tunnel shifts. Large cracks lined the walls like a spider's web of black lines on the dull metal. We pressed our backs to the more stable side of the corridor, moving quickly. After another turn, we came face to face with a blockade. Makeshift barriers of welded scrap and hinged steel barred the way. Printed on them was a crude message: "Quarantine zone entry forbidden." Kira studied the blockade, noticing that it wasn't thoroughly sealed. "This is new," she said. "Old March didn't mention a quarantine on our map, but they might have put it up recently if the toxic storms are intensifying." She banged lightly on the metal, testing it. The blockade rattled, but didn't yield. "Hello?" she called. Her voice echoed. No answer. We were alone. Miri shrank behind me, as if expecting something terrible to leap out at us. "Can we just move around it?" I asked. Kiera pointed to the tiny gaps at the edges, hammered shut with rivets. "We might pry it open, but even if we did slip through, we had no idea what awaited us on the other side." I cast a glance at the ever-present hiss of Miri's suit. We were running out of time if that contraption was about to fail. Kiera must have seen my worry, because she set her jaw firmly, reached into her bag, and pulled out a compact crowbar. "We'll make our own way through," she said, her tone unwavering. It took every ounce of strength Kiara and I had to pry open the barricade's edges while Miri stood watch. After several agonizing moments, we created a gap wide enough to squeeze through. A blast of foul-smelling air hit us the moment we slipped to the other side. Something was off with the atmospheric filters here. Old March's loyal fans or sealed vents must have malfunctioned. The taste of bitter chemicals coated my tongue. Kiara slapped her backup breather over her nose and mouth, gesturing for me to do the same. Miri's suit hissed louder and she squeezed through the gap quickly. We found ourselves in a dilapidated section of tunnel that looked far more ruinous than anything I'd seen before. Overhead, half the lights had gone out, leaving flickering pockets of illumination. Pools of stagnant water lay on the floor, reflecting the faint light in sickly green swirls. The walls had pockmarks, like the metal was eaten away by corrosive fumes. My heart hammered in my chest as I noticed that a large portion of the ceiling had collapsed in the distance, leaving an open wound to the outside. Through that gap, we could see the swirling haze. Wind battered the half-ruined metal, sending shrieking echoes into the corridor. "This area must have suffered a serious breach," Kiara muttered. "We need to keep those breathers on tight." We rushed forward carefully, scanning for any sign of life or a route to safety. Miri's raspy breathing worsened as we navigated around piles of debris and patches of suspicious fluid. I couldn't imagine the state Old March was now in if they hadn't patched this breach quickly. Could the entire settlement have been overrun by toxic air? A turn in the tunnel finally brought us face to face with a battered steel door. Through its observation window, we spotted two worried faces, a middle-aged woman and a grim-looking man. When they saw us, they sprang into action, unlocking the door from the inside. The mechanism whined, then the door slid open, just wide enough for us to squeeze through before slamming shut behind us. The woman, short and wearing a heavy coat, immediately frowned at the hiss of Miri's suit. "We need to get her to a stable environment now," she said. "I'm Becca, an Old March guard. This is Henry." She gestured to the silent man beside her, who was armed with a battered rifle. "We've sealed this area off while we try to repair the overhead breach. The entire corridor beyond here is quarantined." Kiara explained that we had valuable medical supplies for the settlement, and that Miri needed help. Becca's eyes lit up with hope. "Thank you for delivering those. Our infirmary is short on almost everything." She guided us down a narrower side corridor, which led into a chamber with thick airlocks. Once inside, the pressurized hiss indicated a secure environment. The air smelled less toxic, though still far from fresh. Miri removed her helmet's visor, her face pale with exhaustion and fear. A relieved sob escaped her lips when she realized she could breathe freely at last. "What happened?" Kiara asked, running a hand over the battered walls. Henry was on watch near the entrance, but Becca answered. "A few nights ago, a corrosive storm battered Old March's outer passages. Our structure is older, so we took a direct hit. The result was a leak from the outside that spread toxins faster than any prior breach. We lost several mechanics. Now, we've sealed off the worst sections until we can reinforce them." "It's more than just a leak," Henry added, his voice grim. "We suspect saboteurs. We found evidence of tampering with the tunnel's emergency shut-off valves." "Saboteurs?" I stammered, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. "Why would anyone do that? This place is barely surviving as it is." Henry shrugged. "Could be a group wanting to cut off supply lines, or someone with a vendetta against Old March. We have no proof yet, but sabotage is the only explanation for some of the mechanical failures we've seen." Kiara exchanged a worried look with me. If saboteurs were targeting Old March, they might also target other settlements, or the sealed corridors that connect us all. The tunnels were our lifeline. Any attempt to destroy them could condemn thousands of people. We spent the next few hours helping where we could. Kiara and I handed the medical supplies over to a volunteer from the infirmary. Then we joined a small team working to assess the structural damage in a corridor leading to the settlement's living quarters. Mary rested in the infirmary, where they promised to examine her suit or provide a replacement if she could prove she was traveling for a valid reason. Bureaucracy was still alive in these sealed towns, though it was simpler than the old-world systems described in the tattered books. As we helped shore up a weakened metal beam, we overheard talk that a maintenance crew had gone missing near the outskirts of the settlement. The rumor was that someone lured them into a failing corridor, hoping to create a bigger breach. My throat tightened at the thought of roving saboteurs in a place where trust was already fragile. The next day, Kiera and I offered to help locate the missing crew. Old March's officials, desperate for assistance, were quick to accept. We joined a search team of 3 others: Henry, who knew the layout, Mira, a local scavenger, and Jackson, a stocky welder who carried a portable torch. We armed ourselves with filters, crowbars, and spare breathing apparatus. The direction we headed was deeper into the older tunnels. It was the sort of place no one visited unless absolutely necessary. Ahead of us stretched a long, dark corridor. The overhead lights barely functioned, leaving us reliant on handheld lamps. The smell of burnt ozone and rust hung heavily in the air. Our footsteps resounded in the eerie silence as we moved, scanning for any signs of life. At one point, the corridor opened up into a collapsed chamber. Twisted rebar jutted out from the walls, and water dripped from overhead pipes. The glow from our lamps fell upon scattered tools that might have belonged to the missing workers. A battered wrench lay on the floor next to a half-eaten ration pack. Henry gestured for us to spread out. "Stay within sight," he said quietly. I watched Jackson step over a collapsed beam and search along the far wall. He suddenly froze. We all turned in alarm, expecting the worst. It was a man slumped against the metal siding, wearing a maintenance jumpsuit. His eyes stared blankly, an expression of terror etched on his face, but he did not move. Jackson knelt beside him, pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck, then shook his head. "Gone." "Suffocation?" Mira said grimly, pointing to a gash in the man's helmet. Whether it was sabotage or an accident, the result was the same. My stomach turned, and I forced myself to look away. We pressed on, more cautiously now. The notion that saboteurs lurked in these tunnels wasn't far from our minds. Suddenly, a metallic clank echoed from somewhere ahead. Henry extinguished his lamp, motioning for us to do the same. We stood in darkness, listening. A faint scraping noise, then a hush. Anxiety pulsed in my chest. Kiera gestured for us to inch forward. We did, hugging the wall, stepping blindly over the uneven floor. The silhouette of someone fiddling with a junction box came into view. They had a small headlamp and worked quickly, severing wires or installing something I couldn't quite see. A faint beep confirmed some device was being armed. It had the shape of a small, boxy machine with a glowing indicator. Sabotage. My pulse hammered. If that device was what I suspected, a toxin dispersal unit or an explosive, both would be catastrophic. Kiera looked at us, her face pale, and mouthed, "Now!" Henry lunged forward first, rifle at the ready. The figure spun around, yanking out a pistol. My heart jumped at the flash of muzzle fire. The shot rang in the confined space, deafening. Henry ducked, returning fire. Sparks danced on the walls. The figure cursed and tried to run, but Jackson tackled them, knocking the pistol away. The saboteur struggled fiercely, arms flailing. I rushed in, adrenaline surging. We wrestled the figure to the ground as Kiera grabbed the device from the junction box, ripping out the wires. A hiss told me it was already active, but Kiera ripped out the battery housing. The device went silent. "Secure them," Henry barked. We pinned the saboteur's arms behind their back. In the lamplight, the culprit's face was half hidden behind a damaged mask. "Why are you doing this?" Henry demanded, his voice echoing. When the mask was pulled away, we saw a young man with wild eyes. His cheeks were lined with scars, and his pale, cracked lips parted in a sneer. "All the towns suffer anyway," he spat. "We're already dying. It's time to purge the old ways and let nature take its course." He coughed, looking half crazed, as though feverish or poisoned from the outside air. I stepped back, horrified by his conviction. He was trying to speed up our demise, as if believing we should all surrender to the toxins beyond. It was a cruelty at the edge of reason. Henry subdued him further, binding his hands. we found a small stash of sabotage gear near the junction box, including additional devices. Our relief at having stopped them turned to dread at the thought. Were there more saboteurs lurking elsewhere? We returned to Old March, with the saboteur in custody. The settlement's leaders were shocked, but also grateful we'd prevented a catastrophe. They locked him in a reinforced cell while deciding what to do next. Henry shook his head, muttering that they couldn't risk letting him go free or turning him over to a settlement that might be compromised. It was a grim reality. Even justice in the tunnels was overshadowed by survival. Despite the crisis, we completed our delivery mission. The medical supplies were distributed to the infirmary, where they could be best used. Kiera and I arranged passage for Miri, ensuring she could stay in Old March until she found her uncle. The officials eventually provided her a better suit, though she would have to earn it through labor. Miri tearfully thanked us, saying she hoped her uncle would help her family, still stranded in Haven. On our last day in Old March, we helped finalize repairs to the quarantine zone under Becca's supervision. Welders sealed the overhead breach, fitters replaced corroded pipes, and large fans now whirred at full capacity. While the settlement wasn't safe from future storms, it could endure for a while longer. Strengthening one corridor in this fragile network felt momentous, like a small victory for everyone who still believed in preserving life underground. Our return walk through the tunnels to Greybridge was subdued. Although we'd done our part, the threat of sabotage weighed heavily on my mind. The idea that some people believed we should succumb to the toxins, as if it was the planet's retribution, seemed unimaginable to me. Our entire lives had been devoted to staying alive, building sealed corridors, filtering air, sharing resources between settlements. Yet, in the face of that, there were those who thought it was a futile struggle, that we should simply let the swirling poison outside finish us off. Kiera recognized my unease and tried to comfort me. What we did was necessary. We saved lives. That saboteur was just one man, twisted by despair. Most of us cling to hope. I looked at the battered walls of the corridor, at the flickering lights overhead, then beyond the reinforced glass to the swirling storms outside. Somewhere above, smog-laden clouds churned in endless fury, poising the world beyond these tunnels. And yet, inside these fragile passageways, we fought for every breath. We fought because to do otherwise was to give in. The sobering truth was that we were all that remained of society here. Without the tunnels, there would be no tomorrow. When we finally stepped back into Greybridge, the clanging doors closed behind us, sealing out that lethal environment once more. The faint lights of our familiar corridors reminded me that, however precarious, we still had a home. People bustled about their daily tasks, exchanging nods with us as we passed. They had no idea what we'd encountered in Old March, but they still understood the fragility of our existence with every step they took. We walked to the settlement's communal space, a repurposed atrium where plants, carefully shielded in glass cases, stood as a testament to the life we still nurtured. A small group gathered around a battered old radio, straining to pick up the faint static of a distant broadcast. Nobody knew who broadcast these messages, perhaps some faraway settlement with more advanced technology, but hearing them was a reminder we weren't alone in this wide, toxic world. Kiera clasped my shoulder. "Go home," she said softly. "Rest. We'll likely have another job soon, and you'll need your strength." Her eyes flickered with a lingering sadness, but also resolve. I did as she said, returning to my cramped chamber, an alcove that served as both bedroom and living space. I sank onto my cot, removed my boots, and closed my eyes, replaying the recent events over in my mind. The memory of the sabotage devices, the collapsed corridors, and Miri's fear all merged into a harsh reminder of our precarious life here. And yet, I felt something else as well, a burning determination amid the exhaustion. I thought of Miri, safe now. I thought of the lives in Old March we had helped sustain by preventing that sabotage. I thought of the flickers of green plants thriving behind protective glass in Greybridge's atrium. Each act of repair, each sealed leak, each stance taken against those who would condemn us to suffocation, those were our lifelines. Yes, the atmosphere was too poisonous to traverse freely, but we humans are stubborn survivors, forging tunnels of steel through an environment that rejects us. Survival might be a never-ending battle, but it was also a testament to our collective spirit, our refusal to surrender. I fell asleep with a flicker of hope that one day we might reclaim more than just the tunnels. For now, though, we would keep them sealed, keep them working, keep breathing, because there was no other choice if we wanted to live.